I learned how to let the 97, 98% of all the really good people I ever teach or work with and deal with, and the parents and the kids, take the priority and not let the 3% of the crazies dominate my time. And I told kids that were a discipline problem, I says, no, look, we got things to do and you're stopping us from doing it. And you're welcome to join in and learn and be part of everything we got going anytime you want. But in the meantime, don't get in the way.
Shawn, how are you?
Really good.
Good.
Really good.
Good. I appreciate you taking a personal day off of school to come in and talk to me today.
I really enjoy this kind of thing. And this actually is my first podcast, but being able to sit down and actually have a full-length conversation versus just trying to throw things out is, I think, really important.
Yeah. Yeah, no kidding.
And that's part of what's kept me in the school for so long. And one of the things I thrive on in teaching school is when you're able to jump in and really delve into issues and topics. And the agriculture world is so much fun to be able to teach because of that kind of stuff. And
okay, I got to ask, because just talking before we turn on the mics, it's really clear that you love teaching. And here I'm listening to, first off, I came from education. I love teaching. It's all I ever wanted to do. And very unfortunately, once COVID hit and you had a bunch of national civil unrest, the SAT prep that I was doing evaporated because everybody eliminated the SAT.
Eliminated the SAT, yeah.
Yeah, man, how terrible. But I'm hearing you talk about your love for teaching and how you're into it. And I'm just thinking, like, why does this guy want to be running for politics? If I could have stayed in education, I would have stayed. But help me understand that.
Well, a lot of it is coming off of 35 years of teaching agricultural education, and 33 of those years have been at CUNA High School. And, a lot of the growth. And one of the things that was really important to me, and I learned this about year 7 or 8, is I learned how to let the 97, 98% of all the really good people I ever teach or work with and deal with, and the parents and the kids, take the priority and not let the 3% of the crazies dominate my time. And I told kids that were a discipline problem, I says, no, look, we got things to do and you're stopping us from doing it. And you're welcome to join in and learn and be part of everything we got going anytime you want. But in the meantime, don't get in the way. And then the kids started thriving on it, and I started thriving on it. And then when you're an ag teacher, you get these kids for 3 and 4 years at a time. So you really get to know these kids well, and you start them see them as a freshman, and you start seeing the growth that they have. And then when they come back to you and they talk about some of the things that they were able to do in your program that helped set them up for life, that is really, really gratifying and to a large degree very humbling, but it's very meaningful. And so you want to stay. And so because of that, I've learned I want to do things where I can make a positive difference. And I've been the legislative representative for the Idaho Ag teachers for 25, 26 years, something like that. So I've done a lot of legislative work for the ag industry and the agricultural teachers. And I learned I like that too. And I've built relationships with different parts and know quite a few people and had a chance to be involved with that and made some positive differences. And so it's personally in my personal life and with retirement and different things, this is a really good time. And I know I want to be somewhere doing something where I can make a positive difference. And I think the background I have in education, the background I have in agriculture really lends to what particularly the district I live in and would have the opportunity to represent if elected, could really benefit the people in that district and to really solve problems. And it's a really unique, diverse district. It's really a unique thing. So
help me understand then, because when you're saying, hey, look, I want to have a positive impact, I get it. I'm on board, right? I do too. When you're saying you want to have a positive impact and address issues, what are those issues? Right? Because for instance, I have somebody asked me if I'd ever run for school board. I'm like, first off, I think we have a great school board member. So like, I don't think he's screwing things up. Like, I think he's very bright. I think he's very competent. He's super committed. Like, I'm not going to solve anything that he's not solving, right? Like, yeah, we have problems, but he's getting after them. But I don't think that's what's motivating you, right? I think we haven't spoken about them, but you kind of mentioned in passing, like there are problems and issues brewing in my area that I want to address. What are those things? MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com.
Well, you got to break the. I think it breaks down into three main areas within District 23. You've got the CUNA area, it's Hubbard Road South, so South Ada County, and that's where urban is hitting rural really hard. So you got the agriculture and the urban conflict, plus you got the community that's striving really hard to stay CUNA and stay that kind of country type environment and that rural atmosphere, but they're getting pressed on really hard with development, and it's mostly housing and urban development and not businesses. And so the taxes and that base is really difficult. Plus now you have urban conflicting with some of that open range and some of the grazing areas there in South Ada County and some of those ranches out there.
Right.
Then you move out into South Canyon County. Lake Lowell South is 23. And you've got some very, very important farmland out there. Plus there's a lot of dairies in South Ada County and South Canyon County, and some in Owyhee County as well. But you're talking some acreages that are really, really important. And a lot of people don't understand 70-something% of the world's sweet corn seed is grown in this valley.
What? 70%?
70-some%, yeah. And we grow onion seed and radish seed and, carrot seed. And this is a highly valued agricultural sector in the world because of how we grow seed. And it takes surface irrigation and specific acres, and it's a high risk crop and a high value crop. And so, I've got agriculture people talking about how do we preserve acres? How do we keep that thing? And that there's a lot of industry in the Napa area, especially, or Caldwell Parma, that deal with these seed crops. Plus you got all the land that is used to support the dairies for all the feedstuffs that the dairies need. Plus the dairies have to have acres to spread their compost and manure on for their nutrient management plans. So you have all that. Then you have Owyhee County, very rural, very large, lower population. And one of the big issues that we talk about over there is lots and lots of people from this side of the river cross the river to recreate. We've had times when the county population explodes by 3 times. And so now our emergency services are having to deal with those populations, and they're just stressed. They're just stressed. And then you still have the interaction of the recreationists and the hunters with the agriculture and the farming and the ranching and the open range areas. Plus you have military, the Air Force Base at Mountain Home uses that for training facilities out over parts of Owyhee County, plus the wildlife management and, the grazing, working with the federal government. And a big issue in Owyhee County is how to get it's called PILT, payment in lieu of taxes money, to come in to help support. So plus it's all agriculture. The tax base is really low, being able to even just get enough taxes to provide emergency services, law enforcement. I know my son was a deputy for Owyhee County for a while. He's now in Bear Lake County. But he would have vast sections of Owyhee County that he would patrol by himself. And, and I live 6 miles from the county seat in Murphy, and there's been accidents on the highway. And it's been 30 minutes or 40 minutes before there's a response time. And it's just because they're spread that thin across a county that large.
Yeah.
And it has nothing to do with they're working as hard as they can. They're doing the best they can. But that's just what the reality of it is.
So taking a piece of these issues and the complexity, what is it that you feel like could be done better? Because there are some aspects of it you're like, look, there's a low tax base that produces lower revenue or monies to supply emergency services. Okay, you're not coming in saying like, okay, let's increase the tax base or something like that. Like, absolutely not. But there are complexities and constraints that we have to deal in. Where do you think there's improvement to be made?
Well, I think if you're in the state legislature, the way you work in the state legislature, and I really appreciate the one thing that I like being able to take sales tax and income tax and putting it back towards schools so that it alleviates the property tax burden. And I think that's a really good way to do it because it spreads it pretty evenly between urban and rural schools. So it looks the same for a CUNA homeowner as it does somebody out in Bruno.
Sure.
For the Bruno Rimrock or Grandview Bruno School District out there, or in Marsing or in Homedale. And so that, and you're going to be able to do that as long as the economy's good and the revenues are there, and you can put that back and alleviate tax burdens. There's some of those that I think that's important in the state is don't interfere with the ability of local entities to be able to decide what is their tax base going to be. You've got to allow county commissioners, they're going to be able to set some of their taxes or do some things, or they're going to, create taxing districts, or, you don't let the local people do it and enable them to do that and let them make their own decision for the local voter to be able to do that. And that's where the state really needs to have a hands-off kind of approach on those kinds of taxes. Then anything we can do to help build and alleviate otherwise is a good way to do it. And especially if you're able to fund the services that they were able to this year, there were some good things I think came out, and still relieve the tax burden base, and they still was able to cut the income rate slightly, not very much, but it was like some's good, better than none, obviously.
Yeah, right.
And when you're able to do those things, I think that's a good way to approach the fiscal responsibility. And I was teaching school through the 07, 08, 09 years when there were some pretty drastic cuts, and we was having furlough days, and and the pay scales moving back, and not that was easy, but I was very, very grateful. I was in a profession and doing something that had quite a bit of security when I was watching people in agriculture and business, these losing their businesses, these losing their homes. And I'm going, well, my income's being cut a certain percent. And I'm going, I'm pretty grateful to the people that are keeping me in my position and able to let me be a teacher.
Right.
And I can weather this, watching them weather that.
Right.
And then, as economies come back, you try to grow and fix things and kind of make them better. But if history tells us anything, we're probably going to have to face that again. We're going to face that again.
Do you think that we're positioned well to face it again? I mean, because the nature of tax revenue, right? Like some people get there's a big problem in Eagle that I've been educated on, which is essentially we don't really have like a commercial tax base, or we don't have a sufficient commercial tax base. We're predominantly like a fee-based system where we're getting permit money and things like that from people building, but it's very much like a bedroom community that doesn't have like the In-N-Out going into Meridian. The current mayor Pike wanted In-N-Out in Eagle. He said, look, I want every single tax dollar we can get from In-N-Out, because if we don't have that, when the building stops, right, or when the economy contracts a little bit, if we don't have that alternate tax base, we're not going to be able to fund our obligations the same way. So how do you think that your area could be positioned more appropriately for, the inevitable swing that's going to come eventually in the economy?
Well, the swing will come. I think one thing that is encouraging, if we learned anything through the COVID years, obviously the economy took a pretty good hit in the economy years, was we learned that agriculture is a good stabilizing force. And as a natural resources state, when our economy is based by the creation of value, the creation of a product, that lends stability. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy and it's going to be great, but because we create things, you create a dollar. University of Idaho saw a report one time, every beef dollar that shows up in a community, and beef cattle are second or third in our agricultural sector, but for every beef dollar, it rolls over in a community 7 or 8 times.
Wow.
See, so it creates a lot of value just within a community. You talk about, I'm sure the dairy dollar is the same thing. For every dollar, for every time a cow goes in a barn and produces milk, she's producing money. And that rolls over in communities, and every potato that's grown, that's rolling over in every community multiple times to create a lot of value. Well, I think that helps Idaho maintain stability. And it'd be the same for a mining dollar, and it'd be the same for a timber dollar.
Sure, this is just what we have.
Right. Because, the service industry really struggles when the economy goes bad. But when we have an economy and we base it on those things, Micron builds things.
Right.
That's where I think keeps it stable and helps. And then the thing I like, the state has been really pretty good about keeping, kind of an emergency fund, if you so to speak, or so much money in reserve for really hard times, trying to take care of some one-time infrastructure needs when things are good. I like, and it should never be changed. We're a balanced budget state. There's going to be so much money that a state can spend that the state legislature will be able to deal with.
Right.
And that can never go away. That has to stay there. And which means there's going to come times when there's some pretty harmful things, and we're going to have to put off building some roads, or we're going to have to build up some infrastructure. We're going to have to, schools are going to suffer and struggle for a while until you can kind of fix that. But when things are good, you try to get those one-time entities and infrastructure needs taken care of, so you can.
Right. And that's a big issue. The cost of infrastructure, the explosion population in this valley. I mean, it's at everybody's. People are talking about nonstop. It's at the forefront of everybody's kind of agenda.
Sure.
Like, so how do we do it better? Or are we doing it as well as we can? Managing the expansion of roads. I mean, downtown Eagle's going through a big thing. I mean, you have all kind of the ACHDs going crazy everywhere, just trying to keep up with the volume of people coming through here.
Well, fortunately, I haven't had to commute through many of these tough roads. I come out of Owyhee County and I take the back roads, the county roads, and come into CUNA. So my commute is pretty good. In fact, some of the times my biggest worry is I got to drive past some dairies and, their feed trucks and some of the big trucks coming through there. And I, watch those. And I think that's pretty simple. Once in a while, maybe even a school bus.
Whoa.
Yeah. So it's that those are my commuting issues that I have. But, for my deal, and I look at Owyhee County, if you talk infrastructure, there's only a certain number of bridges that get us across the river. So the bridge I come across every day to go to work, if that bridge isn't there and functional and viable, it's an extra hour to my drive to get to another bridge,
right,
and to get across. So, hopefully the professionals that understand this long range planning and the infrastructure in this valley can have a good idea. I know there's some things in CUNA that they're dealing with. They're trying to figure out how to make their emergency services. One of the issues is the train tracks that go through CUNA, because there's no overpass over those tracks. So if there's trains on the tracks, then emergency services can't get across those tracks to help people on the south side. And so how do you fund or get a deal for a community like CUNA so that they can position their fire stations and emergency services so they're access to the largest part of the population, but so they can still access other parts of the area? And do I have really good answers for that? No. Are we pretty good at identifying some of the problems?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the real challenge, isn't it? Because sometimes we can identify problems and we can describe the problems, but how do you fix it on a long-term basis?
Yeah, and one that you're touching on right now, actually, that I wanted to ask you about is EMS services throughout the state are so varied.
So varied.
In resources, so varied in response times. I mean, there are areas still in the state where you have people volunteering for EMS services. Like, okay, you realize that the ambulance driver who's volunteering, not getting paid, the hospital is meaningless to the person at the house who has a heart attack unless you can get them to the hospital. Like, that person who's not even getting paid is showing up and trying to save your life.
Right.
And that just seems so backwards. It seems so backwards that we would have, especially the trauma that, and not to be too dramatic, but I've spoken with a lot of EMS people, ambulance drivers and paramedics, that talk about the struggle of going, like, every single time the call goes off, they know it's going to be horrific. And they're looking at, people dying in the back of their ambulances. They're looking at, overturned cars all the time. And they're transporting these people in a mobile hospital to the actual hospital, trying to get them there. And then they just drop them off and turn around and go back out. Right. And to imagine that people are doing that as a fundamental service for the community on a volunteer basis, it blows my mind.
Well, and I had, and you're right. And we had a function out in Murphy where our volunteer folks out there had a fundraiser, and it's amazing. They put on a chili feed and a fundraiser because just for equipment, so they could volunteer to work for us.
Oh my God.
That's what they're doing. And
I got to bring those guys in. First off, bring your chili. Second, I want to talk to you.
Yeah. And the other thing is, I had an opportunity. They hosted me and had me out in Homedale at Owyhee Rehabilitation. That's they have some long-term resident elderly folks that they're taking care of, and then they have some in and out service rehabs for folks. And the people that it's interesting to talk to them because they're obviously in the healthcare field. And the number one issue that administrator had out there was, you have to make it so we can do our job. The regulations and the hassle and the paperwork is so horrific on us that it makes it hard for me to do my job. And I'm watching this lady, and she has obviously a very special skill. The people in that facility have a very special skill. Right. And as elderly folks would come in and out, she knew them by name. She knew exactly how much physical contact, whether she could put their arm around their shoulder, whether she could touch their arm, whether she couldn't touch them at all. And she also knew we had some treats and some goodies and some different types of food, some fruit, some cookies. She knew the dietary needs, whether they could have a cookie or whether they needed some of the fruit. Mm. And so you're watching that, and the kind of people that run those kinds of things and do those kind of services, it's just unbelievable, the kind of things and the talent that would take, because obviously she's having elderly folks pass away in her facility from the time, and she's showing up every day and taking care of that with her staff, and it's just unbelievable. And so, I started looking at that responsibility on a state level. How do we make it so she can do her job with people like it needs to be done?
Well, interesting. I actually have a very good friend who owns a series of elderly assisted living homes. And he's doing a great job, but he still struggles from the same things that everybody else struggles with, which is he's trying to bring a high quality service. And again, I think he's doing a great job, but it is difficult to keep everything going and keep the right care people in place and take care of the patients and the residents as successfully as possible. And and I'm sure it's a tough line to walk, and I'm sure part of it is something has happened in the past that has caused, and they felt the need to put certain regulations or certain things in place. Right. But I think they need to be under constant review and look and say, is this really a problem still? Right. Or, was this invented because of a problem that existed 30 years ago that hasn't been rectified? And right. Speaking of problems that from yesteryear, there are problems. You've been on the precinct committee you were for almost a decade, correct?
Yeah, I started. It was the early 2000s. The dates get muddled, but early 2000s I started as a precinct person, and then a short time as youth committeeman for Owyhee County, and then we had a lady. She was actually in the legislature a very long time. A lady named Frances Field. And really good, really awesome legislature. And she was our chairman of Owyhee County for a long time. And then when she reached about the age of 90,
good Lord.
Yeah, she passed away at she was over 100 years old when she passed away. Yeah, very bright, very intelligent, fun to talk to all the time. And she says, well, I'm not going to do it anymore. And so I stepped up, and I was the Owyhee County Republican chairman for 10-ish years, 12-ish years, somewhere in there. And then because I teach agriculture and do parliamentary procedures, been one of the things that's been a passion of mine to be able to teach to students and work with students on a competitive level. And we've had some successes at multiple levels.
Oh, that's awesome.
State and national levels. And then they asked me to do parliamentarian work for the party also. But yeah,
you've been in it. So because you've been in it, and again, coming back to the idea that we have laws on the books that maybe served a problem from 30 or 40 years ago, how have the problems in Idaho in your particular area evolved over the time that you've been engaged in these positions?
Well, that's a really tough question, and I don't know if I can really how to put my finger on it, because you've got interesting things. One thing that I did do when I was chairman that came up is Senator Brackett at the time, had to make a vote on the healthcare exchange, the Obama stuff. And it was pretty much a loser deal, whatever way you voted on
right.
it. So it was tough. Anyway, I had some people call me up and they says, well, you need to censor him. You need to do all these. You got to punish him. You got to do those things. And I says, well, that's not my job as chairman. I says, what my job is to facilitate. I says, what I will do, I will put you in the same room as Senator Brackett, and you can ask him exactly why and how he made his vote. And then they wanted no part of that.
Okay. Can you talk to me about this? Because the prevalence of state representatives and senators getting censored by their committees, right? That it's really interesting to me. And in fact, when I met Representative Yamamoto, I had seen a KTVP piece on her vote against, I think it was one of the library bills from 22, and and she got censured for it. And she's like, well, look, I believe in local control.
Right.
I thought the $2,500 fine that was involved here was too much. I thought that there was too much ambiguity in the definition. Like she was concerned about the fiscal impact. That's a pretty conservative principle. Yep. She was concerned about state versus local control. That's a pretty conservative principle. Yep. And she was worried about the ambiguity that could be misconstrued or misinterpreted that could potentially damage the education system or libraries. That seems reasonable. So she had these reasonable things, yet she still got censored for it. And I invited her in to talk about it. But the whole nature of, hey, I'm going to get pulled into a room and essentially have my hand slapped for doing something without having a real open dialogue, right? This is what I'm thinking. These are the issues I had. I understand you maybe don't like these books, but obviously very rarely is the finished product of a bill identical to the original bill, right? Like that's the whole point. I vote no, you come back, we tweak it, we fix these. We can work it. Let's massage the problem. Let's figure it out. So how do you see the capacity or the prevalence of politicians now getting censored by their local committees, factoring into kind of the political wrangle we have in Idaho?
I'm getting quite a response from a bunch of different people on this. There's obviously the group that they want to have that kind of micro control over their legislators and say, you have to do this, you have to do that. Whereas I get a lot of others that they say, I want my legislator to come back and explain to me why they made their vote. And I think it's, my personal position is I think these committees are out of line to be censoring and do that. And I've had a lot of people say, who do they think they are to try to tell me who I'm going to vote for with their endorsements and different things, in a primary election. What they really want is they say, bring them in, have forums, let them explain. Let's, just like you're saying, let's have a full-on conversation and then let me as a voter decide what I'm going to do next. Whether I agree with that, don't agree with that, should they be in, should they be out. And we've actually had a few rollover. This is before they changed the District 23 lines, and we still had parts of Elmore County, but there was, I think it was a senator, but he definitely lost his position because of a couple of votes. And when he came to the forums we had, that was the thing they wanted to know. Why did you vote on that particular issue this way? Why did you vote on it that particular way? And then the voters decided, and he did not win. And I think that's the process that we should have. That should be the process we have. That's the way it was intended. I think that's a very strong process. That's a very good process. And
now, there's a big push towards trying to identify who can run as a Republican in primaries. There's also a big exploding population of independent or unaffiliated because people are feeling unrepresented on either extremes. Mm-hmm. What do you think that means? Do you think that means that people just like being kind of in the middle, or do you feel like the extreme polarization that we're kind of seeing on a more national, now state and local level, as far as ideological leanings for individual parties, be that Democrat or Republican, it doesn't matter, right? Like if you're an independent, that means if you used to be a Republican and now you're an independent or unaffiliated, that means you don't like the Republicans, but it also means you don't like the Democrats, right? Like you got to you're sitting in the middle because you don't like either. Do you think that those people are they don't understand what the Republican Party or the Democrat Party are running for? Or do you think that it's kind of the birth of a new party that is more moderate, is less tolerant of extremes.
Well, I don't know about that. I do know when I talk to people in my district, and Idahoans are highly independent people.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason they're here. They want to live independently. And, and I know when I bought my house in Owyhee County, there were certain things I knew I was accepting. I was accepting that it was going to take a long time for emergency services to reach me. I knew if my house caught fire, we're not going to save it.
Sure.
Those were things I accepted as a highly independent people. And people are very independent, and they want to be independent, and they want to be able to form their own opinions and do their own things. It's been kind of unique because I'm the same Republican I've been for the last, my whole adult life.
Right.
But where people say I'm on the spectrum depends on who I'm talking to. You talk to some people, I'm very, very conservative. Other people would say I'm not. But I'm beholden to my own conscience and my own things and my own experiences, and I'm not beholden to necessarily a title or a group, and I am very Republican, and I'm going to be Republican, and I'm going to go with those things. But one thing I think is important, and I had a individual last night talk to me about this. He says, one of the reasons I'm supporting you is because I want civil dialogue back. And we'll see if that comes back. I know that's important to me, to have civil dialogue. And one of the things, there's some of the leadership things that I've really appreciated about certain people is they're very clear, they're very definite, they can explain and articulate exactly why they have their position, but they also are very dignified in that. And they do not want to go out and hurt other people because they disagree. What they want to do is try to help them overcome obstacles so that they can come into agreement with certain things. So, and I wish that was more of that, for lack of a better description, that far right crowd. They don't want any part of that. They go, this is it, my way or the highway kind of thing, where I think what we need to do is engage with people and help them overcome the obstacles to reach a good goal.
I think the one thing that came to mind right as you're saying that is there was up in Lewiston, there was a big issue with passing a school bond. A friend of mine moved from Lewiston, and she was telling me about this. Right. And they really needed to pass this bond. Their school was in disrepair, and there was a large group of voters who were saying, hey, I'm not giving you any more money. Absolutely not. And one of those individuals ran for the school board, and she won. So now they're like, okay, the schools need money, right? Like our buildings are falling down, all of this stuff. And now this person was on the school board. So what they did is, which I think, again, just as an outside observer or, recipient of the story, is what they did is they're like, all right, look, come with us. Right? You don't like this idea. You're now on the school board. We're not going to ostracize you. We're not going to, draw lines. Come with us. Right. Come with us to the school. Come with us here. Come with us there. Right. And working together with this person who was like, no way, no how, not now, not never, ever, ever. Right? They took this person around and worked the problem with the person. So they established a problem. They established obstacles to, what people thought were clear solutions. They're like, okay, but we can't do that because of this, and we can't do it. And over the course of, I think it was like a year or something, they were able to work with this individual who became a champion of funding the schools.
Right.
Because this individual became educated. They overcame the initial obstacle of this person's opinion of, I don't want this at all. And that's not to say they didn't work the problem and come up with a better solution because this person was part of it. But this person did at the end of the day say, yeah, we do need more funding for this school. And I thought, hearing that, it's like, God, man, what a beautiful, incredible, story of actually meeting people and being pragmatists and not being ideological and working to the betterment of this community, which is obviously like schools, right? That's one of the big pieces of any functional community, like having a meaningful education for youth. So yeah, like I get where you're coming from, which is, hey, we have to have some manner of of working together and working this problem. We have to be dealing with the potholes in the road. We have to be dealing with these problems. And that only comes when you talk to people. It only comes when you explain the problems and you meaningfully engage objections and things of that nature.
Right. And that goes through, all kinds of walks of life. That's not just educational things, and because I teach agriculture, and, one of the things I've taught is some range science. And so obviously this is Owyhee County now, because we got all those public land grazers out there and with their grazing permits. But you talk to a lot of people and they say how horrible it is to have a cow out there, eating a blade of grass. And what I would do is I say, well, if you really want to find out, let's load up and let's go out there and I'll show you how this grazing is controlling fires, how this is adding to the economy, how it's improving riparian areas, and all the thing that's done right with the guys that are doing it right, which is the vast majority of them are doing it really, really well under very difficult circumstances, by the way, and adding value to the community. And there's a reason why a lot of people that hunt are doing it next to either private or trying to find access to private, because the way that that's being managed is also increasing the wildlife populations in those areas for deer, elk, or whatever's there. And so if you really want to know, let's really go look.
Right.
Yeah. Don't take the two pictures of the bad spot that somebody found and they promote that as that's what the industry is, because that's not real.
Man, to talk about people taking one snapshot and then putting it out into the world and saying this is the entire, a very interesting thing. I've waded into the fish and game world, in a limited capacity, but there are a lot of issues, and Idaho is world famous for its fish and game. And
absolutely,
it's incredible, and there are a lot of problems, right? And wolf reintroduction is one of them, and it's super hot. And I had this guy, gentleman by the name of Carter Niemeyer on the show, and he said during the show, he said, "Look, there's more elk here now in Idaho than there were before we reintroduced wolves." And now, mind you, Carter didn't make the call. He was working for the people that said, "Hey, go up to Canada, trap some wolves, bring them back." Fine. That's Carter's position, and his position is backed up by Idaho Fish and Game data. The number of people that were like furious and saying that he was lying completely because their hunting spot had been decimated. And even if we take him at their word, okay, wolves got reintroduced, packs started developing in the area that you like to hunt. That's terrible. Like nobody's happy about that. But to say that represents the entire state of Idaho, I think is quite disingenuous. And every time somebody would say it has decimated the state, I can't hunt anymore in my area, I always say, hey, listen, this guy was just talking about Idaho Fish and Game data. If you have different sets of data, I would be happy to publish them. Because, by the way, these aren't my numbers. Like I'm not taking a side here. I'm just trying to create a medium for dialogue. And if I'm missing something or my guest is missing something, let's have it out. But just bring it out. Let's put it all on the table. Let's talk about this on a broader scale. Don't talk to me about one particular neighborhood or one particular area that you don't like.
Sure. Well, and that's a really good kind of an issue to get into, because we can talk about the history and should have happened, should not happen, should have been introduced. Right. None of that really matters now. What matters now is the reality of what is the wolf population, what is happening, and the fact that Idaho has actually got themselves in a position to manage the wolf population in a much better, proactive way than some of our neighboring states have is really good. And then the other reality we deal with is how do we manage the interaction of wolves with sheep and cattle. Right. And some of the depredation. And so what's the responsibility of the state versus the private on handling that depredation and those kinds of things. So
and what's the responsibility on public lands versus private lands?
Correct.
All.
And so now that's where the discussion needs to be. And where are we going to take care of that, or should we take care of that? Now those are all viable conversations, but let's take what's the situation now, and now what are we going to do? Because spending a lot of time on should they be reintroduced or not, or mistake? No, that's kind of irrelevant now. The reality is they're here.
Right.
The reality is we got to manage them. Right. The reality is we're managing for multiple use for all kinds of things. So now, what's the right thing to do moving forward from here?
There's a gal that I'm hoping to have on shortly, and she not only helps people learn nuances of trapping and hunting wolves, but she's also part of an organization, I believe, that actually helps reimburse hunters for the expenses of going out to get wolves. I can't remember all the details.
See,
but this gal, Kate Smalls, and I was like, God, that's brilliant. Like, here you have these private individuals who are taking up this problem. They're addressing it in the most functional way possible. They're citizens that are now becoming part of the solution instead of looking to the state. And I'm not saying the state doesn't have a place here, but what I am saying is at the heart of any functional long-term solution, you have to have citizens. Like,
Absolutely.
you have to have meaningful citizen participation.
Absolutely. And actually, one of the things I do as a hobby is I love to go out and call coyotes and hunt coyotes. And that works with my teaching career because you can go anytime, any place, any deal, I mean, because it's awesome. And I love it. And the things I've been able to do, and, in December, Christmas break works good, but I've been able to call in multiple species, fox, and even had a badger come in one time. Yeah, I don't know what he was doing out of his, anyway, so I had a badger come in, coyotes.
Did you shoot him?
Yeah, well, actually, my son did. My son was with me, and he's over there, and he's whispering, and he's going, "What?" And he points, and he goes, "Should I shoot him?" And he's only like 30 feet away from him, 20 feet away from him, And,
wow.
And I'm thinking, no, I want to get a coyote to come in. You shoot, we won't get a coyote. And then next thing I know, I hear him shoot that badger.
Man, that's wild.
But, oh yeah, it's a lot of fun, but. I would love to be able to. The two on my list still is a mountain lion, and I'd love to get a wolf. But and I just haven't had time to go do those kind of things because of teaching. And
I have a buddy who lives up in Emmett, and he's got a lot of acreage up there. And I guess he was just driving around on his Polaris, and he's like, "What the hell?" And stops, and he sees these two eyes poking out from the grass, and he's like, "Oh shit, it's a mountain lion." And then he just takes out his gun and pops. And so then the next day I trained jiu-jitsu with this guy, and he's like, "Check out this picture." And it's him holding up this giant cat. And he's a monster of a man. So it's like 100 pounds, but he's just holding, no problem. It's wild, man. And it's like, that's in Emmett, it's right around the corner.
Oh, there was my neighbor just down the road between my house and Murphy, took pictures of a mountain lion on his porch.
God.
So they're passing through our areas, and they're out there. But that would be one of my fun things to be able to do is to be able to go get one of those.
Do you use hunting dogs, or do you?
No. It's I started out and using an electronic call, and then I got tired of packing that around, and so I have mouth calls, and I have so much more fun using a mouth call than an electronic call, and anymore the thrill of it is, getting them to come in and getting to come in, and if you get one, you get one. If you don't, you don't. But, and then and I really like going by myself too, which doesn't really thrill my wife now that I'm getting a little older, but get out there and go places, and you get set up, you're trying to be in some brush or some rocks, and you got all this Owyhee County country out in front of you, and on a nice day, a cool day, but you got the sun on you, and you call, I'll call 15, 20 minutes, nothing happens. And the next thing I know, I find I've dozed off and sitting in my hunting chair. And that's one of those things that really, I guess, inner peace is the right deal, but you get out there and there's no noise in your head.
Right.
And, you're able to, whatever thing you got going on, it's amazing how you get that sorted out and taken care of. And,
God, that sounds fantastic. We got to go right now.
Yeah, let's go.
It's studio.
It's great. It's great.
Yeah, I'm really. I didn't grow up hunting and fishing. I fished a little bit, but definitely didn't grow up hunting. And my buddy Seth Simpson, who's a Gem State Kennel, shout out Seth. He trains hunting dogs, and he came in and was talking about. He also gets paid to do wolf hunting with ranchers and whatnot, so to help them. But he hunts coyotes like crazy. And in fact, he has a pet coyote at his house because he got this out of a den in like 3 days. So I had don't judge me. I have a little French bulldog who's an asshole. Okay. This French bulldog, it's such a pain. It's like, you're cute, you're awesome, you're such a dick, right? Like it drives me nuts. So we send him to Seth, and Seth Simpson sends us back this video of our French bulldog playing with his coyote, which is crazy, right? There's like this big old mouth, and then my dumb little bulldog's like, it's like, oh, he'll eat you so fast, man. Anyway, so Seth Seth goes out and he takes his hunting dogs, and he has a different dogs for different tasks within the hunt. But he said now it's so easy to hunt with a gun. He tries to do coyote hunts exclusively with dogs. So he'll send out a decoy dog that'll go find, a little pack of coyotes, get them all riled up, not get eaten himself, and then draw the coyotes in this elaborate game of pickle back to where Seth is. And then he has got jaghounds that when the coyote gets close enough, he lets the jaghounds go and they just bolt out. And they're like, they hunt him. They go down. And he said that the coyotes are in such physical condition that even with these two jaghounds that are just sitting there and they're you got one job, chase down this other, and there are two of them, right? So he's like holding these dogs and he's like, boom, and they go off. He's like, you got one job. And the coyotes are so nimble and so physically fit that they get away, even with these two monster greyhounds essentially going after them nonstop. But he said once they get a man, he says it's simultaneously inspiring and awesome, and then a little brutal. It's like, because it doesn't end well for the coyote. It's like they stretch a coyote out. One dog comes in the middle. It's like, and then he lets his dogs eat the coyote, which is wild.
Yeah. Well, and there's some side effects of doing mouth calls that have been really awesome, because I've learned to do a fawn distress, and I've had some doe deer, like 30 feet from me, just stomp on the ground and snorting because they're mad, because they're here, and because they'll come and follow up on it. But it's just fun to be part of that, and obviously, they come and go, and but I really,
gosh, man, how cool. That's awesome. Well, listen, Shawn, I've had you for a while. We've talked about a lot of things. Is there anything we've missed? There's probably a lot we've missed, but is there anything you want to mention here at the end?
I think, obviously I'm into this race of District 23. And I think one of the things that has really been missing in District 23, and obviously we're a new district and it's a unique district, but when you're a state legislator, it's really important to be accountable and answer to the people in District 23. So if I'm making education votes, I better be prepared to go talk to every school board in the district.
Right.
And say, this is why I voted this way. Or there's an annexation bill that looked different to people in Kuna than it did to people in Melba. And so I'm going to have to go to those folks and say, this is why I made that particular vote. When natural resources things come up, I'm going to have to go explain, there's such a significant dairy industry. I'm going to have to go explain. And that's one thing about agriculture. Not every bill is positive for every area of agriculture.
Right.
It'll be positive for some and it negatively impact others. I'm going to have to be able to account for that and explain to all of them why I went the direction I did. And that's totally fair. That's totally fair. That's the way it should be. And I don't know, there's a lot of scales out there and scorecards and different groups and different and that's not a good game to play.
Why?
Well, because then who are you really trying to answer to? Who are you trying to answer to? And not everything's going to be positive for the district. And I'll tell you, it's going to be really difficult because I'm anticipating things are going to come up that are really necessary for the Kuna community that are not going to be good for Owyhee County, or vice versa, because of the nature of the needs of the people in those two different areas.
Right.
So who do you answer to? Whose scorecard are you going to follow? It's got to be, I got to go to the people in District 23 and say, this is why I did that. And, since I've been a school teacher for so long, my phone number is like the worst kept secret in that there is, seems like everybody has my phone number, which is fine, that's been done on purpose. That's not. But that's what it really comes down to. And it's really hard you can throw platitudes around and you can throw cliches around, but when the rubber meets the road, what's it really going to look like?
Right.
And that's the part that you got to rely on your relationships. You got to rely on people that have expertise in different areas. You got to rely obviously on your own background and your own conscience. And then you got to do what you think is the best thing to do. And I figure if I do that, I'll always be able to live with myself.
Right.
Even if later, I get voted out or whatever, if I do things that I think are the right things to do, I will be able to live with that.
Yeah.
And that'll be, and I'll be happy with that.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Well, Shawn, thank you for coming in today.
It's actually been a lot of fun.
Hey,
I've
it's
really
not that
enjoyed
painful.
this. No, it's really nice. It's really nice.
Well, I just like talking to people. I like understanding, and I think that's like you're talking about. It's communication with people. We all have to make hard calls. These are complex situations. The more I realize, the more I think about it and deal in this world, the more I realize anybody who gives me a short answer that sounds real good, it's got to be trash. Like, 'cause especially if it sounds real, like if it's too good to be true, and if it's short, like a one line, you're like, wait a minute, man. There are two sides to this pancake. I get
There always are.
Yeah.
Well, and there's always the monster moral issues that you're plainly just a no.
Yeah. Right.
But when you get down to the nuts and bolts in the business of Idaho, and that's actually, you start looking at a lot of the legislation that comes through, hundreds of bills, whatever. The vast, vast majority of it is the business of Idaho. I mean, what a good simple one that they straightened out is, with the new technology, trucks being able to pass port of entries because of the electronic accountability that they have. Should they have to stop at a port of entry?
Right.
Well, that's keeping up with where the technology is and make it right. That's the business of Idaho.
Right. It's not the cultural war that a lot of people are focused on with politics these days. At least that appears to be what people are very, very focused on, and that they're worried about, they're anxious about things that have happened in other states or problems. Like, okay, but yeah, we have real problems here though. Like we have real functional trying to make Idaho run better problems. And yeah, we can talk about keeping this ridiculous social movement out of this space. And like, yeah, fine. That's fine. It's fine to talk about that, but not talking about that to the point where you neglect the actual functionings of the state.
Yeah, and I get to deal with a population of student and with parent that when you get to a lot of the, I guess, social wars or whatever, and, we were at our state FFA convention, and what was so incredibly awesome, when you get to all those social constructs or whatever, nobody cared. Never even come up. Everybody was focused on, I'm competing in this event. I'm competing in that event. We're working on this. We're doing this leadership activity. We're having this event. And I'm sure, those things existed within the group like they do any group. But the reality is nobody cared.
Right.
What they cared about is we got a job at hand and a task at hand.
Right.
And that's what you focus on, and then that's what you do.
Right.
And it's really amazing how people treat each other when that's
right.
When that's the focus, because all of a sudden you have a shared goal,
right,
and a shared thing. So, whatever the rest of that is, doesn't even come up.
Yeah, right.
It's
focus on Idaho, focus on the task.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's get this done, so that's really refreshing to me.
Yeah.
And that's what's built me up as a teacher, and probably every so often former students, I'll get a letter or a thank you note or something from them. And the one thing that sticks with me the most is when kids say, they don't say thanks for teaching me, they don't agronomy, or once in a while, thanks for giving me a passion in this area.
Yeah, sure.
But mostly I get, thanks for teaching me I could do things I never thought I could do.
Yeah.
And you go, my career's been worth it just because of that,
Good for you, sir.
And
well, again, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for participating, win, lose, or draw. I keep telling people we need individuals engaged, whether or not they're the winners or the losers. It's people participating in this big, crazy mess of trying to get through the day, especially in politics. It's not a fun arena. So thank you for what you're doing. I appreciate you.
Well, thank you. It's been fun being here.
MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com.